Hello, everyone.
So, hi.
Hello. Oh,
Hi,
gee.
Dr. Samuel Hori, Dr.
Okay.
Robert, Dr. Preet, and all our colleagues. I hope you are fine and you're enjoying your time. I would like to welcome you today in the third session of the Global Fulbrighters lecture series, exploring diverse perspectives in language, culture, and society, a multifaceted journey. I would like to start by thanking other colleagues who animated the previous sessions. I'm talking about Dr. Eva, Dr. Wedcha, Dr. Pierre, Dr. Anna Gabriela, Dr. Namayuba, and Dr. Shahriyar Haidar. Today we have also very interesting set of topics that we are going to be
They were like it.
listening to you about it and maybe exchanging some ideas with you. So welcome again in Faculty of Arts and Humanities, Kairouan, Tunisia. The audience is composed of a number of students, MA1, MA2, and third year students, specialized in English language, who are specializing also in intersectional studies in linguistic and literary discourses. Um, I would like, if you may, first of all, to start with Preet. She asked to start first because it's very late apparently there. So after your permission, a slight change in the program to allow our colleague Dr. Preet Hidradar to start, and she will be talking about critical literacies in the digital age. Preet is associate professor of teaching at the Department of English. She holds a doctorate in technology mediated language learning in higher education contexts, and she researches technology and digital discourse in linguistic, literary, and cultural texts. She is the co author of Critical Reading and Writing in the Digital Age, a key resource for linguistics courses in English and the new media studies programs across various universities in Europe and Asia. She has served as academic affiliate at the Department of Culture, Communication and Media at University College London, UCL, in the Institute of Education, UK 2017, and has also been a visiting scholar at the Department of Language and Communication at the University of Southern Denmark in 2018. She has worked on research projects through competitively funded grants from the Research Grants Council of Hong Kong government and won awards for her teaching and learning initiatives at her university. In 2018, she won the Competitive Teaching Excellence Award for her outstanding contribution to teaching. She also received territory-wide recognition with the UGC Teaching Excellence Award nomination certificate from the University Grants Committee. I'm so proud today to have you and providing these series, volunteering to provide these series of lectures to my students. The lectures, the sessions are recorded for your, so that you can consult them. They will be available again on the YouTube channel of the English Department, Faculty of Arts and Humanities. I'm so happy to see you again after the journey that we had together in University of New York. Without any delay, I would like to leave the floor to Dr. Preet to start her presentation.
Myself, yeah. Just try to share my screen. Can you? Oops, I can't do that. Is it possible for you to help me share my screen? I mean,
Yes, definitely. You can share your screen, Preet. We've seen
yeah,
it at the
all right.
beginning. You can reshare it.
Right. Yeah. Okay. All right. I couldn't see the window, so.
And she left.
I think she left by accident.
Yes, I think so. Let's wait for her for a couple of minutes.
Maybe she's done already.
She's here again. All right. Yes, Preet. Won't tell you that Rob started to pull your leg. No problem.
Am I audible, visible?
Yes, I confirm. We can see your presentation.
Okay, great. All right. Okay, so hello everyone, and thanks for coming to this session, and thank you for your introduction, Professor Meletti. Today I'm going to be talking about introducing the field of critical language study with an attempt to raise awareness about how ideology can be overtly expressed or covertly hidden in contemporary English language texts. And I will do this by introducing a range of analytical techniques which reveal ideology, which in turn could be used to create texts to express certain identities. So the main theme of my presentation today will be how power is exercised in contemporary discourse and how power can be challenged through critical awareness. In other words, I'll be talking about developing critical literacies in the digital age, and this partly comes from my book on critical reading and writing by Routledge in 2016. Now, we all know that in the high-tech globalized world, we have come a long way from the printing press, where we are witnessing changing societal structures, increasing diversity, marketing of ideas. It's reaching us in ways that hadn't been invented even 20 years ago. And we are swamped with these masses of information from sources across the globe. And we are able to make meaning from various sorts of resources. And the changes are occurring so rapidly that we need to start thinking about whether these will have positive or negative effects on our ways of living, on our ways of communicating, and so on and so forth. And it is over here that critical literacies come into play that help us make sense of this rapidly changing world around us. So with this, I'll divide my talk into three parts, namely, what exactly do we understand by critical? How do we approach critical literacies? And how do we create critical awareness by analyzing the linguistic choices that are made by creators of texts in our day-to-day lives, that we encounter in our daily lives? So first, a word about critical. What exactly is critical thinking is obviously, it often means that looking at the strength or otherwise of deductive logic of arguments and opinions. But in a truly critical approach would actually question how categories that the logic operates with are created in the first place. So how a language imposes a certain kind of a grid-like classification or category system, which partly determines how we think and how we perceive the world. So for example, some languages may have special lexicalized categories for kinship terms, like including elder brother or maternal aunt, and that would sharpen our perception of age or relations within the community. And also those categories that become accepted in a certain kind of a culture often reflect the power structures of that society. So for instance, if we take a term like retail therapy, and how that supports a certain kind of a consumerism or of multinational companies that are controlling our lives day in and day out, the invention of the term therapy itself projects itself as a panacea due to various situations that we find ourselves or at work. That we choose to become attuned to makes us avoids us from taking any specific kind of action. And this is something which we need to become more and more aware of as we are bombarded with so much of information around us in these day and age. So what are critical literacies essentially? Now, critical literacies, they are, of course, there are several versions of critical literacies, and each of them is underpinned with a different theoretical perspective. All of them involve an active, challenging approach to reading and textual practices. So critical literacies involve the analysis and the critique of relationships amongst texts, language, power, and social groups and social practices. So critical literacy shows us ways of looking at written, visual, spoken, multimedia text, and enable us to question and challenge the attitudes, values, beliefs that lie beneath the surface of these texts by asking very crucial questions. In whose interest is this text? For what purpose is this text created? Who benefits from this text? Thinking about these questions become key to understanding the relation between language and power structures that operate within the text that we encounter in our day-to-day lives. So critical literacies start from the premise that language is always used in some context that includes power relationships. So in fact, language is power. And all texts, including, of course, mainstream media, including scripts for movies, television shows, advertisements, any kind of text that we see in our day-to-day lives are written by someone, obviously, for a certain targeted group of audiences, and for a specific purpose fulfillment. So now these purposes are not often transparent. And so for this purpose, readers need to develop and exercise their critical faculties to filter what we understand and believe from these texts. So we are constantly assaulted by language that is not just unclear, but often deliberately deceptive and manipulative. And we need the tools to unmask the true purposes of language within a particular context. So we can both understand the true meaning and, as necessary, also try to free ourselves from the pernicious effects of these kind of texts that we encounter. In other words, we need to pay attention to the language and the choices that writers have consciously or unconsciously made in composing texts. And once we pay attention to these choices, it'll raise our critical awareness and how these choices structure our thought processes and affect our social and environmental behavior. This obviously comes from, this idea of critical language studies comes from the pioneering work of the linguist Norman Fairclough. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of him, and where with an aim of helping, where he kind of creates this theory of helping increase consciousness regarding the significance of language in producing, maintaining, and changing social relations of power. In his words, consciousness is the first step towards emancipation. So if we were to understand issues of social concern, we would need to examine how language predisposes us to think about society and the world around us. And we often hear of objective, unbiased description as though our language and text can simply reflect a pre-existing reality. But actually, we have no access to that reality or that world out there. And the same event, for example, could be represented in very different ways. So, for instance, if we take a line from a news report about an incident that took place in the city of Bristol some years ago, it says the trouble erupted on Thursday night after two men were killed when the stolen police motorcycle they were riding was involved in a crash with the police car. Now, the same incident could be reported in other ways, like the trouble erupted on Thursday night after police murdered two 17-year-olds on a motorcycle by ramming them with their police car. Or it could be written in this way: the trouble erupted on Thursday night after two youths killed themselves by driving their motorcycle into a police car. And we can see how the choice of reporting the incident could represent or construct the event in quite different ways. So rather than simply reflecting a pre-existing reality, what the writer is making a choice within the resources of the language, it's constructing that representation of the world. So with this, I just want to look at certain processes that are involved in vocabulary. I mean, there are a lot of ways of doing this kind of analytical technique. I mean, using these analytical techniques to unravel these kind of processes that go on. In the interest of time, we'll just look at two major strands. That is, one is vocabulary choices and the other one is grammatical choices. The first one is that of vocabulary choices. That's classification and categorization. So if I ask you to look at these two, just look at the top of the screen, that is where you have these 6 boxes. And if I ask you to categorize these boxes into two separate sets, then each of you would kind of divide the boxes depending on your prior belief systems. Obviously, like you could choose 1, 3, 6 and 2, 4, 5 based on a certain criteria, or you could choose 1, 2, 6 because 1, 2, 6 contains only the knots and no X's. Or you could choose 1, 3, 4 with uppercase letters in the center and 2, 5, 6 with lowercase. So the point is that any number of alternatives of categorization is possible, and adopting one criterion for classification means excluding the other possibilities. So the question is, why do we categorize one way rather than the other? And the answer to that is that we select our selection of classification reflects our own, obviously I said that, beliefs and value systems, and these categories could affect the verbal and non-verbal behavior. So when news reports categorize people into expatriates, refugees, or immigrants, they reflect perceptions towards the different types of foreigners in a country. And an example of such a classification can be seen in a sarcastic use of Gulliver Travels, where he says there were no pickpockets, highwaymen, housebreakers, attorneys, bawds, so on and so forth. Clearly, what he's doing is by clubbing together attorneys, politicians, tedious talkers, and virtuosos, is a list mainly made up of criminals, suggests that they too belong to this category. Obviously, this is a sarcastic use of categorization. So that's one way of doing it. And another way of categorization is when you invent new categories of people. So for example, you can construct a reality rather than reflecting a reality. So for instance, the media may invent categories which of people who are perceived as some kind of threat to themselves, like couch potatoes, shopaholics, or even sodcasters, like people who play music all loudly on mobile phones in public. This is just a created category. So categorization is one such way in which vocabulary is used to classify objects, people, or phenomena in the world. And one byproduct of this categorization is stereotyping, all right? And this occurs when, based on some members of a class of having a characteristic, other members are assumed to have that characteristic. So the puzzling anecdote in this is a perfect example of our prior assumptions based on stereotypical constructions in society. So if we just read this anecdote, it says a father and a son were traveling home late at night and were involved in a high-speed car crash. The father was killed outright, and the son was rushed to the hospital to undergo surgery to save his life. But the surgeon said to the hospital administrators, ethically, I am unable to operate on this patient. He is my son. So it takes us some time to understand how is that possible that when the dad was killed in the accident, how is it that the surgeon is saying that this is my son and I cannot operate? But obviously, this is a typical stereotypic. This is based on an assumption that the reader might take some time to unravel that it's quite likely that the surgeon was the mother, was the boy's mother. That's because of our preconditioning, right? So similarly, it's very common, you would notice in your day-to-day lives, to come across examples where women are defined in terms of their family relations and not occupations. Like, so there is the possibility of finding a Jane Johnson, 32, mother of 2, did XYZ, rather than finding a sentence like Ben Johnson, 30, father of 2, did XYZ. Again, when women are defined by their occupation, a specific, exceptional case is made where you add another kind of a qualifier like lady or women, or even for that matter, working mother. You see this very often in mainstream media. You hardly see a term like working father. So this is what we mean by vocabulary choices that are made. And similarly, just like vocabulary choices, you have grammatical choices or grammatical processes that could affect the representation of reality and have consequences in the real world. And at the unconscious or the latent level, we often get manipulated by two major transformations in grammar, and that is passivization and nominalization. In passivization, obviously, a sentence like the police arrested 10 teenagers in a drug busting exercise last night can be converted into something like 10 teenagers were arrested. You can easily avoid by the police in a drug busting exercise last night. By using passive, what you are able to do is you're able to completely avoid the doer. So passivization allows you to leave out the experiencer, the doer, the speaker of the sentence, and this becomes a very powerful tool when you want to consciously avoid mentioning who done it, right? And sometimes this enables writers or producers of text to protect the sources of course, but it also enables, it's a powerful tool to enable you to kind of smuggle an opinion as a fact. So if you have a sentence like, it is widely believed that Tories will not, that the Tories will not survive the confidence vote in the parliament, clearly who said it, who believes it, it's not mentioned. So it's an opinion which is very conveniently smuggled in as a fact, and passivization allows this to happen. Similarly, nominalization is even more powerful tool than passivization in terms of it. What is nominalization? Nominalization is essentially when you turn a verb or an adjective into a noun phrase. So most obviously you add NESS or ATION. But less obviously like when you have a noun as a verb like catch. All right. So if you have like a sentence like Hutus killed 1 million Tutsis in the Rwandan civil war, and instead of doing that, you just end up writing something like there were 1 million killings in the Rwandan civil war. It omits both the perpetrators and the ones who are affected by that particular. Sorry, where am I? Yeah, it kind of affects both the actors and the perpetrators, and of course the affected and the victims. And what else nominalization does is it kind of also suggests some kind of timelessness. So not only omission, but also timelessness. So when you say something like dissatisfaction with the government policy on golf courses will cause a loss of popularity, there is no way to understand whether who is dissatisfied, when were they dissatisfied, are they still dissatisfied? All of this is completely conveniently omitted. So when noun phrases carry with them this kind of existential supposition, and you have an answer like, no, I don't think so, when you just say something of this sort, obviously the presupposition is yes, maybe the loss of popularity may not go, but the dissatisfaction still remains. So again, there is a covert, covert process of hiding something from the reader. So we can see that how certain grammatical constructions could leave out the participants or mystify the processes that they refer to. Once again, affecting our perceptions of reality. And once we develop the skills constantly to kind of develop these nuances, to see what the writer means, how the reader is affected by how the reader is being positioned, we can finally investigate certain kind of ideologies that perpetuate. In the digital age, in fact, you have even one more added layer of visual information, and that is gained more significance. So you have more resources to unravel in terms of the font and the color and the positioning, whether the participant is looking at the camera or is it a top angle, and so on and so forth. Again, that kind of critical awareness needs to be generated and it's got a different visual grammar itself. But the main questions that need to be asked for developing critical awareness, obviously, what's the genre? Is it an informative text? Is it an argumentative text? Is it an instructive text? So on and so forth. What's the purpose of the writer? What kind of reading path is the writer forcing the reader to go through? Is the writer wanting you to go in a linear mode or modular, look at the picture, then look at the text, or so on, or keep dividing your attention between the two? How does a writer position the reader using both the choices, whether it is linguistic or visual? What kind of processes do we find inherent? And this in turn will help us understand what kind of larger discourses or past structures unravel through these choices. So answers to these questions by following various such analytical techniques will bring about an awareness about how language and forms of text produced reflect certain kind of latent ideologies and contemporary social concerns. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Preet, for this very informative, in fact, lecture, comprehensive also. Thank you also for respecting the time allotted to you. This is so kind of you indeed. we'd like to go to one set of questions and answers because Preet unfortunately will leave Washington Square Conference today. She has something else to do and prepare. So do you have any questions? So the floor is yours for questions. The audience here in the room as well as the online participants. And let's start with online participants this time. Ladies first, maybe Sirin Shikhruhu. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much for allowing me to ask my question, Dr. Mimoun. And thank you so much for this presentation. It's really informative indeed. So my question is related to assessment. Methodologically speaking, how can we assess critical thinking in terms of qualitative and quantitative approaches? Thank you so much.
Do you mean how do you create assessments for students? Is that your question?
Yes, that's the question.
Yes. Okay. So when you are when you're teaching critical, okay. So what I talked about was how you raise critical awareness. But then when you create assessments, you could create it in a way where you give them text and give them questions related to the text. So for example, you could just pick a topic like chocolate, all right, and then you could give a text which talks about benefits of chocolate, and then another text about my journey of leaving stop eating chocolate. So like you have two different types of genres, and then you could get students to pick the kind of vocabulary choices that one text is doing versus the other, and see that how the vocabulary choices fulfill the purpose of the text. So if one text is a kind of an argumentative text about chocolate is bad for your health, and another text is about I left chocolate because of XYZ, then what are the different genre moves that the writer is making by using certain kind of grammatical categories, or using certain kind of grammatical processes, or certain kind of vocabulary choices, sentences? You can start breaking down the text and inculcating these skills of textual analysis amongst the students, and put that as an assignment, like get them to just compare two texts for that matter. So that could be one way of assessing critical thinking skills. Does that answer your question?
Thank you so much. But my question was precisely, if I want to paraphrase it, how can these questions that related to analyzing text reflect really elements or abilities of critical thinking, practically speaking?
How do these skills
How
enable
the
critical thinking?
questions or the activities in which that we want to see students performing critical thinking skills in relation to analyzing text, how do these questions reflect critical thinking precisely?
Yeah, so the whole point is of them using this microanalysis will enable them to find out why did the writer choose not to use an active voice in this particular article, or why is it that the writer is choosing to use a certain kind of an instructional or an imperative or a directive sentence as opposed to just a normal sentence. So when you get students to think beyond that particular grammatical or vocabulary choice and get them to link it to the purpose of the text and what the intention, or unravel the intention of the writer, that becomes a task where you're raising the awareness, you're enabling, you're fine-tuning their critical thinking skills, you're creating a certain kind of a practice in them to be able to question not just how many active voices or how many passive voices or so on and so forth, but why, constantly asking the question why. Why do you think the writer made this choice? Why do you think the writer did not write this way? Yes, that's right.
Thank you so much for your answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sirin. We have another question, I think, here. So would you please approach and ask your question?
Okay, I would like to thank Dr. for her presentation. It's very... Do you hear me? Are you hearing?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay, so I would like to thank Doctor for her presentation on critical discourse analysis and what we mean by critical as well. I've been very informed by what she does mean by critical, to free people, to filter, to unmask, and so on. I personally have read the 3 earlier books of Fairclough, I mean, Language and Power, Discourse and Social Change, and critical Discourse Analysis, the analysis of the language. I would like to ask you just a couple of questions. Number one, you focus in mainly on micro-analysis of the language, I mean, nominalization, categorization, and grammar, but I think can you explain more macro, CDA, and so on? And in relation to this, because I found that Norman Fairclough have given justice to language and textual analysis of the language and social studies of the language, political studies of the language, but did forget of the philosophical side. I mean, can you see any link between Immanuel Kant, criticism, and critical discourse, and what we mean by that? I'm sorry for making my question so long.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khalid. If you may, Preet, I may add 2 questions and leave the floor for you to answer before having the last set of questions. So first of all, I'd like to thank you very much. Enjoyed your lecture in relation to critical literacy, definition and application. Basically, you mentioned something very interesting, which is language is power. Yes, we know about it, certainly, language as power, language is power. So my question is very simple. If language is power, then why do we fail as humans to solve problems through language? The second question is, do you think that educational institutions are doing enough work to familiarize the public with manipulation through language, categorization through language, and the different tools of passivization, etc., for grounding, backgrounding, etc.? Do you think as educational institutions in different parts of the world are doing enough work to familiarize the public and students about this, especially that we see that major news outlets are actually making use of the same tactics, the same strategies, the same tools, the same techniques to fool the same people?
Yes, thank you. I mean, that's precisely the motivation behind raising critical awareness. And just to go back to the previous question about microanalysis and larger ideologies, I think it is through these microanalysis that we can arrive at larger ideologies. Yeah, I mean, it's completely. I mean, yeah, there is a school of thought which thinks that there's no point in counting the number of noun forms that are used and counting the number of passivizations or whatever. But then the whole idea is that you are drawing this to bring to light a certain larger pre-existing kind of a construct that is existing, and getting students to become more and more aware of that. So far as educational institutions are concerned, I think, yes, we can see that. I mean, we can see that even today, where mainstream media outlets are just, I mean, again, depending on larger societal power structures, we have reporting of the same incident in 2 different ways, several different ways, and certain kind of propaganda that is being used. What mainstream media, what educational institutions could do maybe is perhaps just constantly inculcate or like have more courses, or not just focus too much on, try to make whatever their critical discourse studies courses are more relevant to existing societal, whatever text they see in their day-to-day life. So yeah, one way of, I don't know, maybe educational institutions need to embed themselves more into societal forms where maybe writing, I don't know, depending on what country you are in, you can write an opinion article, or you can do whatever, like you can write an opinion piece and constant, like have a regular column on language and the choices that writers make in certain kind of texts. You could do that, but the most how do you say, the most effective way to do it would be to get students more and more aware about this, rather than, I mean, that's the only way to go about it. I mean, if 25 students take away something from it, that's good enough for them to be able to know that, okay, there is something wrong with this is a propaganda text, or this is not a propaganda text, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. One last set of questions, if you may, and we'll let you go, please. I think Amel Hani has a question, and there is another question here from Khalil Ghammari. So we can take 2 additional questions, maybe. So, Amel?
Hi everyone, I hope that all of you are doing well. So thank you, Doctor, for your insightful lecture. What I want to ask you for is that you highlight that language is ambiguous and make some people more powerful than others, especially in media. So is there any strategy, any applicable way to help us as students to uncover those implicit messages and to become aware of those, for example, propaganda or anything? I mean, is there any way to uncover those
Yes.
implicit?
Yeah, so that is exactly what critical language studies does, is like it kind of tries to unravel the implicit messages that are there within a text. So when you are looking at a text, ask these questions: who has published this text? What is the intention of this text? Who benefits by reading this particular text? And then start looking at the kind of language that is, how many times a certain actor or a certain participant is mentioned in that text, how many times one word or one major institution, how many who are the people who are left out from that particular text. Constantly, like, practicing this particular skill by asking these questions of a text, you will be able to implicitly unravel that. But this takes time, this needs certain skill sets, you need certain analytical techniques. But I'm pretty sure that you when you ask these major questions and then you dig deeper into it by looking at these different linguistic choices that are made, because like we say, there is no pre-existing reality. Technically, there is no pre-existing reality. It's just constructed through language. And who is creating that reality for you is something which you need to be made aware of through these critical linguistic studies skills.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Peer, for your really enjoyable and insightful presentation. Preet, yes. So my question is pretty similar to Dr. Mimoun's previous question. So following Farcliffe and even Michel Foucault, if you want, take on power as a discursive process. That is, they somehow propose the idea that every conversation can be seen as a battleground of in which power operates. So does this mean that we live in a world where when we live in a world where there is no place for a healthy, constructive, or productive, if you want, conversation?
Now, the very fact that there are possibilities of creating a reality through language in different ways means that there is a possibility of also having a conversation. So yes, now not being able to have the conversation is dependent or contingent upon how rigid one is, or how one is blind, or how one chooses to not see the other side. But the point over here that we are trying to make is that if we try to become more and more aware of these kind of, like, whose side this text is coming from, who is what is the intention, who is benefiting by reading this particular text. Is it just serving a certain kind of an ideology? Is it just feeding into that particular thing, or is it actually challenging existing societal structures or power structures? That is something which we need to. So yes, I agree that I see your point about not being able to have a conversation, but the fact that there is a possibility of creating different forms of reality you can be optimistic in terms of having some kind of discussion across the table.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Preet Hidradar from University of Lingnan University, Hong Kong, for this constructive lecture, talk, and the discussion also we had and you had with students here and teachers in regard to your presentation. It is very informative, in fact, deep, and it is constructive. Thank you so much indeed. Now we'd like to invite Dr. Samuli Hori from Finland, who will give us a lecture on language and violence. I'm so happy to see Samuli. Again, you're getting younger and younger, Sam. So thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Mimon. So nice to be here with you and the guys and your students as well, who I'm impressed by the questions that the participants already posed to the previous presenter. But okay, let me first try to make this sharing work. Oh, how does it work in this Meet? Sorry, Mimoon. Can't find anything. Is it possible if it is like, you know?
It's up on the right, it should be.
Up on the right.
In the PowerPoint presentation where you can then share.
Is it? It tells me that Mimoon, I have to ask your help because my machine says that I cannot share in this.
You can go to the arrow. There is an arrow down the screen. You can, yes, click on it. Click on it. It says present now.
Share this screen, okay.
Yes, so you share the screen you want. Yes, you're sharing. Okay. Yes, thank you.
The most difficult part is already over for you. You can relax.
Okay, let's see. Exit. Now I still have to kind of find my presentation from somewhere to... Okay. Okay, slideshow. Sorry for the... Can you see my stuff here now? It should be a gray background and language and violence over there. Okay, wonderful. Okay, I was going to give you a little talk about just of a ongoing work that I'm now, which is mainly, or actually only about the legal cases from the US Supreme Court from way back, and all these cases are concerning some matters of racial justice or racism. So that is my project on in the long run. But what I was going to kind of try with you guys here today was only to kind of present one simple experiment, if you will, for which I need to do some preparations in terms of, like, you know, trying to kind of like lay down the bare bones of a certain analytical apparatus with which you can make things visible in those legal cases. So it's language and violence, and I'm going to say something theoretical first, and then try to see if we've got time to have a look on a legal case from mid-19th century in the US with the help of that analytical apparatus. Okay. But anyways, speaking of the title that I have given last summer, I think, to this talk, without knowing at all what it's going to be, violence and language. And now let us like try to a little bit like see what that might mean. Okay, starting with language, for me, first of all, I'm really honored to be able to talk to you, real proper philologists and linguists. I am not one. I am a lawyer or legal philosopher rather, but I've been thinking about problems of language for a long time already. But let us try to kind of go back and take it very simply first, the language and violence stuff, not go to the very sophisticated level where in which Preet, for instance, was already talking. And I'm sure all of you are already at that level, but I'm kind of bringing us a little bit backwards now. So let's say that language would be something about communication, persuasion, argumentation, and maybe politics in some sense. Politics is conducted through the medium of language. Whereas in contradistinction to that, you would talk about violence as something that is not about politics, but about war, rather. And that would be force, more ruthless means of influencing other people, subjugation of other people. So you get this kind of idea that language and violence can be regarded as something that are defined exactly as things that are different from each other. Okay, but then I would like to bring about something that I'm sure that you have had in mind already, that are they not intertwined in so many ways, and I bring out here the two most famous, I suppose, at least in where I come from, ways in which you would bring these things together. And the first is by a 19th century military theorist, actually, Clausewitz, who was not only a theorist but also an army general, who would say something like this, that war is actually politics, or war is the continuation of politics by other means. What he would mean by that war is actually something smaller, and always around the war efforts there are the broader political goals that need to be taken into account as well. So that which means basically that you shouldn't destroy everything around you, because after the war you need to live and try to live in peace again. But then there is the other way around, in which this constellation was put, and that is coming from Lenin, who was very fond of Clausewitz, but who would say something who would put the whole thing on its head, saying that politics actually is the continuation of war by other means. And he would say he would think in the way that actually politics is a kind of war, a ruthless practice where you need to all the time be on guard with the enemy and try to destroy your enemy and so forth. So you would see here that somehow you would have war and politics capable of being perceived as within each other's perspectives and frameworks in the way that they can be seen as being more or less the same thing. And now the question is whether you can do the same kind of operation with respect to violence and language. Can you ask the question, at least in which you would ask the question whether and in which ways violence can be seen as some kind of language, let's say communication in general, and on the other hand, whether language as such can be also seen as some sort of violence on its own. So that is, but I leave those as questions at this stage only. Then let me say something about a guy in the background of my work more broadly, Michel Foucault, who would certainly exactly work on that kind of intertwinings between politics and language and violence and politics and war, who would exactly be the kind of theorist who would see see politics as something that is like, you know, or power as something that is like, you know, bringing together both discursive and non-discursive practices. Okay, but his kind of entry point to this whole problematic is the notion of strategy or logic of strategy. And there are like 3 points that I would like to bring about. The first 2 of which are not that important for our experiment, but the last one is. So in his definition of strategy, he would say that strategy is always about a means to an end, and which means that it is like a purposive activity rather than something that you just follow rules or anything like that. So you have an end as an actor, and you enter into a strategic situation where you have an enemy, an opponent there, and you try to, and your final end is to try to win the enemy that you have there. And strategies are always planned with a view of what one knows about the plans of this enemy that there is in the strategic situation, and also with the view of what that enemy, your opponent, knows about your own plan. So that kind of, these 2 things kind of like, you know, define the strategic situation. But the most important bit that I would like to work a little bit on with my experiment here on, or at least try to kind of begin to work with, is the 3rd aspect of strategy, which is about the ways in which one actor can try to neutralize the resources, the means and ways available to the enemy at the outset, and even try to appropriate those means of the enemy and turn these means against that enemy or opponent. So these 2 things, neutralizing and appropriating of the means of the enemy, are what I would like to have a look on now. And this is all about, like, you know, obviously in the game of in the discursive game now of speaking a language. And now I would like to try to do something with the legal case. This is the case of Dred Scott from 1857 from the US, which is the time just before the Civil War, which or relatively, like, you know, close to the Civil War, which started 1861, as you might know. So there is a case. I mean, what fascinates me in having this case here is pretty much in the way that you have the actual war starting pretty much right after this case was decided, and even some people would say that this case exactly was something that on its part triggered the Civil War. Obviously there were other forces and things that were there in the background, but somehow as a trigger, this case of the Dred Scott might have been something that really worked there. So I would have it in the way, I would like myself to imagine it in the way that you have a real war and violence, physical violence, massacres, battles starting right after this, but then you would have the discursive struggle or warlike linguistic and discursive thing going on in this case a little bit before. So what the case was about, let me say just something about that first. There was the family of the Scots family, the father, Dred Scott, wife, Harriet Scott, and their 2 daughters who were born into slavery. The parents were born 1795, 1815 at the time, in a state where slavery, in those states of the US where slavery was like, you know, mm, mm, uh, which practiced slavery, and they were slaves at the beginning. But then what happened was that they were traveling with their owner around the country, and also entered the territory, the areas of which were not practicing slavery. First, there was the Free State of Illinois, and then the so-called territory of Wisconsin, which was not a state, but which was a territory of the U.S. And that was defined as a free territory in the way that they didn't have slavery there either. But then when they came back to St. Louis, where they had been before, to St. Louis, Missouri in 1842, to a state which did practice slavery, they there, as a family, tried to buy their freedom from the owner, but without success. The owner didn't want to give them the freedom. And after that, what they did was that they instigated legal proceedings in the court to try to get their freedom that way. And that was possible because, according to the legal principle at the time in Missouri and maybe all over the place in the country, was that if you had been free at one point, you will be free forever. And because they had been living in a free state that does not, and a free territory that does not recognize slavery, they were regarded as free persons over there, because they didn't, in these areas, the powers that were not recognizing slavery at all, so they were kind of regarded as free. But anyways, in those legal proceedings, it had to be decided whether these people, this family, would be slaves still, or would they be free, or would they even be citizens, which all three things are a bit different matters. And let us quickly see just the main things about the Dred Scott case. What happened in that case? The case itself is huge. It's really major. It's a major legal case, and which, like, you know, is famous not only in the circles of the legal theory, but also in the cultural history of the U.S. and all around. It's super big case, and a lot of things happened in the case, and it's a long text. It has more like, you know, 250 pages in it. But for the purposes of this presentation, I will just try to kind of call out from that text a certain, like, you know, let us say what happened at the heart of that case. And what I mean by heart is exactly this, that what happened from the perspective of this strategic working with the enemy's means. Remember when I said that the last bit of Foucault was the last element of strategic situation by Foucault was that what you can do in a strategic situation is try to appropriate the means or resources available to your opponent, and not only and you can try to appropriate them and turn them against your enemy, or at least you can try to neutralize the resources available, the discursive sources available to your opponent. So let us say that the means available to Scott were, first of all, obviously, the whole rights thinking in the country, the thinking in terms of rights. You have it in the Declaration of Independence already, which starts by this famous sentence: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that every person is born equal and free." So the rights thinking should be available to Scott in that legal case in general. But not only that, but also the laws, not only the rights, the individual rights, but also the kind of legal apparatus was on the side at the outset of Scott, because there was a legislation by the Congress from 1820 already, which had stated that the Wisconsin Territory, the area among other areas, were agreed to be free from slavery. So it was the law actually that said, the Congress legislation, which also said not only the rights in the Constitution or in the Declaration of Independence, would say that slavery is not there. But what this Chief Justice Taney, very
Dr.
like,
Samuli,
2 minutes.
5 minutes left, if you may.
Oh, so much. I've got only 2 minutes on my clock.
That's
but,
great. That's great. That's fine.
Okay.
That's okay.
But anyways, this infamous guy, this Chief Justice Taney, who became some kind of an anti-hero afterwards in the whole legal history, at least, but maybe in the constitutional and political history of the US more generally too. What he would do there basically was that he said two tremendously shameful things. He would say, first of all, something like this: that black people in America can never be citizens because of their lower intellectual and what have you, moral status and capacity. So that was one of the most ruthless racist statements that legal courts have ever stated anywhere in the world. And another thing that he would say was that according to the Constitution of the U.S., the Congress can never legislate in the way that they would end slavery. So that was what was the kind of scandalous result in that case. But if you look at the way in which he proceeded when he was writing the judgment, he would first, if you look at, I've got them in the wrong order there, but let us start with the laws, which in the first place seem to have been on the side of Scott, on his side, as means available to him. He would say that the laws actually, the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional. So Chief Justice Taney used the constitutional law to be able to neutralize, to destroy, to use the military terminology, to destroy the resource of the Missouri Compromise that was available to Scott. But the other thing which is also interesting, I think, was that he would also draw on rights, but this time the rights thinking that seems to have been first in the available to the family of Scott, he would now draw on the rights thinking, but saying actually that this case is all about not rights of the person and freedom, but rights of property. And therefore, and saying that actually the rights, exactly the rights of property in the Constitution would tell that there is no authority, no power in the U.S., not federal or state power, that can violate the rights of property of the owner of the slaves here. So here, with this, calling out of, if you wish, of this kind of idea that how this Chief Justice Taney worked with the means and means available, means of that seem to have been the weapons in the hands of Scott, and first neutralize them and then use them against the enemy as such. That was the kind of point which I'm trying to make, in order somehow in the end to make visible the way in which language may work out and turn out to be one way of exercising power for sure, but maybe more interestingly, exercising violence in this particular case. Okay, I think that's it, and I thank you for following this maybe a bit messy presentation, but hopefully something will come out of it at some point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Samuel Hori. This is interesting indeed, especially focusing on issues related to strategy within the Foucauldian perspective, and focusing particularly on strategy that is about ways of one actor trying to neutralize enemies' resources. This is very pertinent indeed, and we can relate to it, in fact. Thank you also for walking us through issues of language, violence, law, legitimacy, rights, humanism, which are actually intertwined, intersectional, and interconnected by nature. So thank you very much indeed. After your permission, we'll move to the third speaker and fourth speaker, and then at the end, we'll have a number of questions, if you may. So I would like to introduce the third speaker. Today we have Dr. Robert Alfred Winkler from University of Salzburg, Germany. Robert Winkler is postdoctoral researcher and lecturer in the Department of English and American Studies at University of Salzburg in Austria. His habilitation project traces the ambivalent significations of the log cabin in the American cultural imaginary from the 19th to the 21st century. He received his PhD from the International Graduate Center for the Study of Culture at Justus Liebig University, Gießen. Sorry for the pronunciation, Rob. In 2019, with a dissertation on race and gender in hardcore punk, Generation Reagan youth representing the resisting white neoliberal forms of life in the US hardcore punk scenes. Robert has published widely, among other things, on hardcore punk, literature and death, whiteness studies, econarratology, or the philosophy of Martin Heidegger. Without additional delay, I leave the floor to Robert, who will talk to us today about hegemony, subversion, and the other in American cultural history. The floor is yours, Rob.
Thank you so much, Mimoun, for this very kind introduction. I want to thank you for having us, and I want to thank the University of Kairouan for organizing the Global Fulbrighters Transdisciplinary Lecture Series. You know, I guess I memorized it correctly. Thank you very much for bringing us all together. It's a pleasure to see you, my fellow speakers in the panel, Samuli, Preet, Esme, still pronouncing it wrong, I guess. And also Emilia, I think she's also showing it in her classroom, so it's really a pleasure. I'll try to share now as well. Now I'm having the same problem. How can I? Yeah, I'll take my time, but I don't know where I can. Ah, here, maybe. Does it work? Ah, okay, so you can see the screen now. Because I cannot see you. I can only see the PowerPoint, but you can also see the PowerPoint, right? Okay, great. Okay, we already had that. You should be seeing now Whodunit, Hegemony, Subversion, and the Other in American Cultural History. So I think that really ties in with Preet's talk and with Samuli's talk, so that the declaration will show up again. Obviously, when I reread my title, I thought like, oh gosh, what did I do to myself? Hegemony, Subversion, and the Other in American Cultural History. That would be the topic for an entire lecture series. So I'll obviously only give you some hints. And I can also share my PowerPoint presentation with you guys. I can send it to you, Mimoun, if you like, later on. My outline, at first, some theory. Why do they hate us? So from the American perspectives, why does the rest of the world hate us? Tying in with Brahmin American niceness. Then speaking about hegemony, subversion, and the Declaration of Independence, tying in with Samuli. 2 case studies, the other African Americans, the other women, and then how the other becomes subversive. Sorry. Are we in the presentation again? Okay, all right. Let's go ahead then. Ugly American versus Nice American. Carrie Tirado Brahmin in her 2017 book starts off with the ugly American, and that figure, that national stereotype might be more familiar to us. The loud, arrogant, demeaning, thoughtless, ignorant, and ethnocentric American, tied to American imperialism that comes from a novel looking at the Vietnam War. So this kind of ugly American interfering in other businesses. And Brahmin now, in a very genius move now, says we also have the nice American. So she proposes, quote, to look at the more banal attributes such as friendliness, the rhetoric of sociality, and the importance of likability. When you've been to the US, there's a certain stereotype that American people are just very nice people. They might never call you back. They might not really care about you, but they are nice on a superficial level. So that's what Brahmin is interested in. Why do they hate us? She says her research has been prompted after 9/11, because after 9/11 there was a widespread sentiment in American society. How could that happen? Why do they hate us? Again, perceiving oneself as the good, nice American and not seeing that it might have that there might be a different perception from another, part of the world and another part of society even. So, quote, niceness implies that Americans are fundamentally well-meaning people defined by an essential goodness, unquote. She continues, and that brings us closer to the topic of hegemony, subversion, and the other. So when you are part of the hegemonic, of the leading of that segment in society which has the power, you frame also acts of regression as just reacting. That would be the second quote. Even acts of aggression are framed as passive, reluctant, and defensive acts to protect oneself against the potential aggression of another. So in a sense, you construct yourself as the victim facing another, and the other can be within society, we'll speak about that in a minute, or the other can also be outside of society. And also she says that the book is from 2017, 2016, Trump became president of the US for the first time, to put it like this, and obviously Trump would be one of these people. And she also quotes Trump, and I'll quote him here as well. Well, I think I'm a nice person, I really do. When I made, harsh statements about various people, that was always in response to their criticism of me. So the others are the bad guys. The others are criticizing me. I'm a nice guy. I'm a nice Trumpian. I'm Trump. I'm only defending myself. So I want to start off with this, notion of self-perception and perception of the other and by the other, which fundamentally falls apart. Brahmin says this niceness has a particular function in American society and in American history, quote. Niceness has enabled a pattern of forgetting, a way to disavow both the 19th century wounds of genocide against Native Americans and slavery against African Americans, and their ongoing legacy today. That would be that kind of reasoning. He might have owned slaves, but he was a nice guy, you know. He always went to church, he always greeted me. So that kind of thinking, which makes American mainstream society forget about its own dark side. However, Brahman says this niceness has also been mobilized by, you know, these segments in society which don't have the hegemony, which are the other, and which can also mobilize niceness in their very subversive revolutionary acts, quote. On the other hand, however, over the course of its highly contested history, niceness has also been the vehicle of critique, a way to challenge, unsettle, and contest manifest destiny. So when you think, for example, about Martin Luther King and the more moderate strain of the civil rights movement, they dressed up nicely. They dressed up in their Sunday best, went to demonstrations in order to show that they are nice, decent people, that they are human beings, tying back in to Samuli and the Dred Scott case. So trying to, via niceness, get there. And I want to now come to the Declaration of Independence, staying, you know, with the terms of hegemony, subversion, and the other, and also with this niceness. There's a great anecdote that Thomas Jefferson, who was the main author of the Declaration of Independence, went to Great Britain in 1786, so 10 years after the declaration, which is basically a declaration of war. It says, like, we are splitting off from Great Britain. More about that in a minute. So Thomas Jefferson is in Great Britain and he meets the king. They have a reception. They are both diplomats, and the king is not really, you know, is not really wanting to speak with Thomas Jefferson. He's not in the favor of small talking, and so he turns, you know, his back on Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson can't wrap his head around. He complains in letters, he complains in his autobiography, and the, you know, the underlying thread is like, I'm a nice guy, we Americans are nice, how come that the British king does not speak to me? How rude is he? So, you know, not understanding that obviously the British king might be pissed off, and for a reason, because what was considered his property, the 13 colonies split off. But this kind of niceness gave Thomas Jefferson this ideology in a way, not to see their own crimes and their own active role in, you know, in actions, but only passively reacting. Also when it comes to the Declaration of Independence, which was signed on July 4th, 1776. Obviously, it's a very long, complex history. Main thing is here that representatives of the 13 colonies come together. They think about how to get along with Great Britain, because Great Britain was the hegemonic force, and these guys perceived themselves as suppressed, as the other, so to speak. And they said, okay, we cannot go on like this. We have to somehow declare our independence in the face of Great Britain and split off from Great Britain. Quote, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitled them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. So this basically means we have to explain to the world why we split with Great Britain. Again, you can say we are nice people. We have to somehow be decently explaining. And now the classics, Samuli already pointed towards that. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So it's also like a revolutionary thing to say that we have a right for the pursuit of happiness. This is not an invitation to be, you know, buy big cars and become a multimillionaire. So happiness here is more tied that somebody has the right to live out according to his or her own ability, mainly to his. We'll come to that in a minute. The other red stuff, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends to provide us with these rights, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government. So that is basically their justification for the split, and the main part of the declaration is then an accusation of King George, you know, that guy who 10 years later was not so happy to meet Thomas Jefferson again, because in this main part they accuse King George of, you know, taxation without representation. He has a standing army in North America. He's, you know, tied in with the Native Americans, trying to foster insurrection, all that kind of stuff. So they justify, as I said, the separation. So you might think these guys, these, you know, leading representatives of the 13 colonies are the oppressed other, and that's how they perceive themselves. Other people have said, wait a minute, let's take a look. Who are these people and what will they be about to be installing in North America? So Howard Zinn, very famous historian, critical left-wing historian, says, quote, "The reality behind the words of the Declaration was that a rising class of important people needed to enlist on their side enough Americans to defeat England without disturbing too much of the relations of wealth and power that had developed over 150 years of colonial history." So that turns it already upside down. We have like an elite of white men who want to split from Great Britain, and they need to mobilize, they need to create a hegemony in order to have support for that split. Because the Americans, not every, you know, man, woman living in North America wanted to split from Great Britain. Many had very, you know, deep loyalties to the old British colony, British motherland. So, and that brings us to the creation of the other, because I think it's not a surprise to you that that all men are created equal has been debated, and it's obvious not only in historical retrospect that this did not mean all men. All men and all men are two different things, as Howard Zinn already pointed towards. And that brings me to Michael Rogan, who helps us better understand this relation of hegemony and the other. He says, what basically defines American political culture, what he calls political demonology, is, quote, "the creation of monsters as a continuing feature of American politics by the inflation, stigmatization, and dehumanization of political foes," unquote. So the other is being inflated, stigmatized, and dehumanized. African Americans, women, Native Americans, Muslims, communists, etc., etc., etc. Only very briefly, you can read up on the slides. African Americans, they are not really considered African Americans, as Samuli told us already. Africans become the major other in the context of American cultural history. Very important is to understand that the first Africans being brought to North America in 1619, in the decades to come, they were not automatically slaves. They were indentured servants. This means that after a couple of years of working off their debt, they could become free. But in the course of the 17th century, slavery becomes institutionalized as chattel slavery, which deprives African Americans of all human rights, basically. So that is the creation of an other, which is delineated by a certain outer appearance. Very famous pictures you might have seen. So I want to also point you towards, you know, you have the Civil War and segregation phase in the South after the Civil War. And for example, popular culture is also very important in creating this hegemony, in upholding this idea. We are, you know, we are the good majority, the good hegemony, and the others are threatening us. That's also Rogan's point, basically. And he also points towards the film The Birth of a Nation from 1915. That film basically invents modern cinema. It's a blockbuster by today's standards, and it's also very influential because it inspires the formation of the second Ku Klux Klan. So this means that in this case, art precedes reality, because these racists which come to found the second KKK take that from that film. Second case study, only briefly. Women are also constructed as another within that framework of suppressing and holding your own hegemony when you are lucky to be a white man, you know, within the original 13 colonies. So from a legal perspective, women are dead before the law. This means they do not have any rights before the law. They are so-called femmes couvertes, coming from English common law, and this means they cease to exist as a legal category. So it's not that they have less rights, they don't have rights at all. They don't have property rights, they merge with the, you know, they are somehow subsumed into the rights of their husband. At first, father or brother have to take care, and then husband takes care. Only briefly, you can read it up later on. By marriage, the husband and wife are one person in law. That is, the very being or legal existence of the woman is suspended during the marriage. Briefly, I think I have like 2 minutes left. My point now is obviously also like very cut down. You have these hegemonic suppressed structure in America. You have the creation of the other, but the other obviously becomes subversive. The other strikes back, so to speak. So first brief case study, it would be how women strike back. So first feminism, women start to organize. In 1848, they come together and write the Declaration of Sentiments and Resolutions. And guess what? That is somehow, you know, like the twist of the presentation and of the Declaration of Independence. These women use the Declaration of Independence. They rewrite the Declaration of Independence to embody them, to empower themselves. So they say, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. So this is like pointing the finger and pointing the mirror at the white power structure, at the white male power structure, and using its very own documents of justification to subversively claim their own rights. So that would be the passages where George III is being accused, no taxation without representation, blah, blah. And these women now accuse man per se. He that is man has made her, if married in the eye of the law, civilly dead, as we just said. Second case study, 1 minute. The Black Panther Party is the more, you know, an example of the more radical strain of the civil rights movement in the middle of the 20th century. And these black men and women are more radical than Martin Luther King and the more moderate strain of the civil rights movement. They are part of a national, they see themselves as part of a broader decolonial uprising of oppressed people. They have a 10-point program where they say basically, unfortunately, these rights are still these points are still relevant because the American political hegemonic system has not given them these rights up to this day. We want freedom, full employment, decent housing, an end to police brutality and the murder of black people. I think that is familiar to all of us. And the thing is, the genius thing is that at the end of the 10-point program, guess what? They also feature the beginning of the Declaration of Independence, applying the same logic, saying to them, okay, it doesn't matter whether it's King George III or the white power structure in the US, as long as they are oppressing us, we have the right to overthrow them. We have the right to revolution. So again, in a very genius move, pointing the mirror and the finger to the white power structure. I hope that worked. I couldn't see you guys. I hope you could see my presentation.
Yes, we can. Thank you. You finished, Rob, right?
Yep, I'm done.
Right. Thank you very much indeed for this presentation, Robert, on hegemony, subversion, and the other in the American cultural history. I remember Robert was the first one, I think, or Samuel, both of you, you were among the first one with whom I talked about the organization of this event, and we started talking about making it around the issues of other and the otherness in general. That's why yes, and that's why the theme is closely related to what Samuel is talking about also. Thank you very much indeed, Robert, for this presentation. I like it actually what when you talked about all men are created equal and free as part of the American culture, American history. This is very nice saying indeed. It rhymes also, and it is related to one of the main sayings that we have also, something said by I think the second king of Muslims, I think 1400 years ago, when he said, when have you enslaved people while they were born free? That's also a saying that we keep talking about, and it is closely related to what you were talking about. I'm sure there are a number of questions that will be raised later when we finish the last presentation by my friend and colleague Asma Hassan from Bahrain, from University of Bahrain. Her presentation is entitled American Commercial Culture Post-COVID. Asma is a CELTA certified EFL instructor from Bahrain. She holds BA in education in English, BA in education from Bahrain Teachers College, and an MA in Applied English Language Studies from University of Bahrain. Asma has 10 years of experience in EFL education. She started her career teaching English to primary level students in different public schools in Bahrain until she joined higher education sector in 2017. Asma is an active member and volunteer at Manama Center for Human Rights, in which she was involved in several voluntary work involving monitoring Bahrain's parliamentary elections in October 2022. Asma has participated in numerous events and workshops related to English education and aspires to conduct and be part of more in the future. She has recently co-authored research studies discussing digital solutions in the educational field. I'm so happy to meet you and see you again, Asma, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mamoon, and thank you, everyone. Can you guys hear me? Is everything good from my side?
Yes, affirmative.
Great, great, great. Thank you so much, Mamoon, and thank you for this wonderful opportunity, like to have us all back here together. I'm so overwhelmed. To begin with, thank you for the awesome introduction. Actually, I know, like when you think about it and you see my topics, like you have a teacher and you have someone who has studied English education, and then someone who has studied applied linguistics, and then coming here, and I'm a teacher, and coming here and talking about commercial studies, you know, you're like, what's going on here? But let me share my screen with you first. Allow to, okay, small, large, what does that mean? Okay, I think I'm not allowed to share my screen. I'm trying to, but it says Safari if allowed to share screen. Go ahead. Still no. Okay, if you guys would just give me a second, I need to give permission to. Sorry for that.
What time is it in Bahrain?
6 p.m.
6 p.m. Okay.
So if I forget stuff or leave stuff out,
Long day already.
very long. But oh. Okay. Does anyone know how I can, like, you know, turn permissions on here? It's not working.
did the same to me, that it said that I have to put the permissions on, but then when I tried the other button, then it suddenly started to work. So I don't know why. So if you try again and push the other one, then if you share the whole screen, then I suppose it's
Right.
working.
How about now? Good?
We
Can
see
you guys see
you.
my... Okay. You will stop seeing me in a second and seeing my presentation. Can you see it now? Okay, great. So to begin with, when I chose this topic, I actually had a different thing in mind. You see, when we applied for the Fulbright program, we were asked on, there was a question on how are you going to make this experience relevant to your work, right? So what I was thinking about is, as a language teacher, I'd be like, connecting the language, the English language, with the American culture. But when we actually went to New York, it's like, a huge part of New York felt familiar. Now, why is that? When it came down to think about it, it's like I felt like we have some sort of a similar commercial culture, and this is why I will be talking about American commercial culture in the Middle East in specific. Now, I might be talking about, mostly or my region of the world, but you guys are welcome to share yours as well. I know that we may have some similarities in, the rest of the Arab world. I would love to know about that. Now, initially, to begin with, again, my focus is actually English and English education and heritage and so on and so forth. But I chose this topic because I also have, a side hobby of buying unnecessary stuff. And when I thought about it, it's like, when you think about it, it's like, how are we affected by this? It came to me that we are hugely affected by the commercial culture, specifically the American commercial culture. Although you would say that the British have spent so much time in our countries, you would say that we are affected by them, but in fact, we're not affected by them. We're actually more affected by American commercial culture. So to begin with, what do I mean by the American commercial culture? Basically, American commercial cultures refer to a set of practices, values, and behaviors related to commerce and consumerism in the United States. So, how people spend their money in the United States, what gets them to spend their money there. Now, to be more specific, a big or a huge part of the commercial culture is also the advertising forms of mediated culture. So basically, advertising, what you see on advertising, this plays a major role in the commercial culture. Now, on the one hand, of course, everyone is, I'd be happy to hear your opinion. Now, on the one hand, when I thought about it and when I compared, Bahrain and the Middle East in general, or at least to be more specific, my part of the region, the Gulf region to be specific, I was like, how are we influenced by the American commercial culture? And in my part of the world. Now, number one, you guys know that everybody knows, due to globalization, the American or the United States, let's say, market has had a huge impact on the world. They're kind of like, there is competition in the global market, but you can obviously see who's being more, let's say, prominent than the others. Now, in addition to that, it is evident through media, through music, through art, through technology, through fashion, sports, and even our habits, that we are highly influenced by the American commercial culture. Again, I'm talking about, my part of the world. This could not, I'm not generalizing it on everyone or every country in the Middle East, but it's interesting to know, why do we have that in the first place? Now, let me give you a few examples. I know that my title said post-COVID, but because I didn't mention so many things about post-COVID here, but the thing is, I came to this realization after COVID. So when COVID hit and everyone was basically, during the lockdown, everyone was at home. So we had nothing to do other than, spend money and shop and buy stuff. And this is where it hit me. We are majorly using US technology, whether we want to order food or whether we want to order, for example, clothes online, or even if it was, something like, say, an accessory, you would always, buy it or order it or be influenced somehow by an American, let's say, company. So for example, during COVID, even now, you would see that the majority of the technology that we are using here, it's always, from the US, for example, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and so on and so forth. So how did we, or how did it take over? This is what I would like to know. Now, I know that it's more advanced, so we don't have any other options, but how come this took over rather than any other, technology? In addition to that, when it comes to fashion, I've noticed that many people, for example, largely use Amazon, they largely use eBay, they even use StockX. Now, StockX is basically a new, let's say, it's not a new, it's kind of like, more, let's say, newer than the rest. What StockX is kind of like, a bidding website where you have some product advertised there and you would bid on it. And again, when you go back to the roots, it's still American. Like even in Bahrain, when you order something from StockX or eBay, we still have to pay taxes for it, which is like, it doesn't make much sense because we don't live there. So I think in some places the tax should be exempted. It should be tax-free because we don't live there. But in addition to that, like when it comes to food, I've noticed that we have a lot of American chains. Now, McDonald's is basically, is well known. Starbucks is well known, but it was quite surprising to me to see that we also have Five Guys. Now, if you remember, Rob, you mentioned that, like, Five Guys was some sort of like, an American thing. I was very surprised to find it here. Literally 1 week after I came here, I've noticed that they have 4 or 5 branches in Bahrain. And Bahrain, by the way, is an extremely small country. I'm sure like half of the participants are Googling it right now, like just to make sense of what I'm saying. In addition to that, I have noticed that we are highly influenced. Now, the business sector is highly influenced by the American culture as well. Now, as I go on or as I move on, you will see that the American commercial culture highly, let's say, promotes entrepreneurship amongst Americans, right? Now, I've noticed that this is also happening here in Bahrain. So, for example, let me just give you an example that I just thought of. When we went to the US, we did see some trucks, some food trucks here and there. But in comparison to the food trucks that we see in Bahrain, now in Bahrain, it's getting really, 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 like, outrageous. You'd find a food truck every couple of feet. Now, when I saw that, I was like, how did we get this? How did this come to us? Now, finally, there is also the stock market. Now, it kind of like was a surprise for me that I've noticed that so many people here, this is just, something that I've noticed. It's not like, evidenced or let's say research yet, but I've noticed that so many people invest in the American stock market. So for example, they would rather buy shares in Nike and Starbucks even, and McDonald's and Adidas and so on and so forth, but they will not buy, they would be so scared to buy stocks in their own country. Now, I know that this is not, let's say, something new to us. This is probably something that we have, we see it in our everyday life, but I would like to know, like, where does it stem from? Where does it come from? Now, there might be some, let's say, positive points to the influence of the American commercial culture, but you have to also think about the negative points or the criticism associated with American, let's say, commercial culture. Now, number one, it's promoting consumerism and materialism, whether it was in the US or in our countries. People are becoming more and more, let's say, pushed to buy, pushed to have more materialistic stuff with them. In addition to that, the advertisement that we are exposed to is usually manipulative advertisement. It's telling you that it's either that you get this product or something is missing. So it's basically creating a false need that we don't actually need. In addition to that, and again, this cannot be generalized to everyone. I've noticed that maybe in some cases it may have an influence on society and values. So basically, again, the commercialism, let's say, culture would drive people to become more individualist, to, let's say, to prefer some values over our own original local values. Now, in addition to that, and this is something that I have also noticed in my country and a few neighboring countries around us, that it has an impact on small local businesses. So for example, let me give you an example about Starbucks or McDonald's. Now, these two big chains, when they started in Bahrain, although McDonald's probably started before I was born here, I can't remember, but let's say Five Guys, for example. Now, when you bring a business like Five Guys, which is basically, a corporate business from the US, you are basically threatening the other local businesses because you're basically bringing them something that is international, that is American, that people would be, let's say, more lenient towards having, and then you would be threatening your own local brands in this case. In the end, it's also, in the end, we can also say that the American commercial culture also may have some psychological effects in terms of basically the constant exposure to advertising, the constant exposure to, let's say, these commercial products is driving us to want to buy them. It's kind of like putting us under pressure to conform to societal standards. Like, we should have this and we should have that. And of course, the list goes on and on and on. There's also a part about the environmental threats, but just to keep it, short, and I know that I'm the last one to present, so, and let's say for the benefit of time, I removed that. But it's also it's also interesting to know more about to research more about the criticism associated with American commercial culture. In the end, I would like to conclude that, yes, American commercialism, it has positive and it has negative impact. It depends on how you perceive it. Now, what I am intending to do is basically, study them both. So how is it positively affecting us and how is it negatively affecting us? Now, I know that, again, this is something, let's say, not linguistically related or educationally related, but the thing is, I thought about this is like, again, it's interesting to know about this. Now, why is our society going through this? What have caused this? What are the causes? How did it start? And how does it, where does it stem from? And so on and so forth. So finally, what I would like to say is that the impact of the American commercialism actually varies from place to place. It is usually, or it is, let's say, also influenced by local traditions of the place, by the political dynamics and the socioeconomic conditions of the country or the region as well. So to conclude, this is basically what I have about American commercialism culture. And thank you all for listening. I hope that I kept it as short as possible. And I would welcome any questions if you guys have any.
Thank you very much indeed, Asma, for this presentation. It's closely related, in fact, to the interests of my students and what we're talking about also today concerning American culture, American society, consumerism also, especially in Bahrain. So thank you very much. We're glad to see you today. I would like to thank you so much, and won't take a lot of your time, but we still have maybe about 10 to 15 minutes for the discussion. So I leave the floor to the students to ask a number of questions. And I thank you very much for your patience also to answer them if you may. We can start with the online participants. Nisreen Sheikh Ruhu. Nisreen again. No, last time it was Shireen. The twins. Yes, the twins, Shireen and Nisreen. Yes, welcome, Nisreen. Yes.
Hey, thank you, sir, for the opportunity. I enjoyed all the presentations. And my question is for Dr. Asma. Actually, it's not a question. I'm trying to comment on something. You actually said that you're interested in knowing if the case of Bahrain is relevant to other Arab countries. Well, actually, in Tunisia, it is highly pertinent to our context, and especially now in the context of what is happening in Gaza, and people are trying to boycott these American brands, and we are actually in trouble of not finding which brands to buy, and especially that when a local brand starts to invest and try to occupy the market, we get the people do not support these local brands, as in Bahrain, as you said, and maybe it has to do with the commercialization, as it is market driven, and it is highly pertinent, as I said, to our case in Tunisia. Thank you.
Thank you, Nasreen. Thank you. If I may add, Dr. Maimoon, actually, to begin with, I was so pleased to enter the live classroom, and some of the students wearing the kufiya, and even like Dr. Maimoon was wearing a kufiya. That made me, so happy. This is number one. Number two, I think I can say that, you know, nowadays, although like, you know, the big corporations such as Starbucks and the other coffee places, like I'm talking about coffee because, you know, the majority of people are, you know, this is the most, let's say, popular product that people buy. Now, what I'm happy to announce is that in Bahrain, we actually did not have trouble with that, because when people boycotted, for example, Starbucks or Costa, or what was the third one, the Caribou, or any other, let's say, American brand, they actually, you know, this shed the light towards the local coffee brands. And this is actually, you know, this has raised the Bahraini market nowadays. So people, I'm glad to say that people are not, you know, they're not stuck in that matter, because instead of the big, let's say, food chains, we also have alternative Bahraini local food chains. Instead of having or consuming the, let's say, global coffee chains, we also have our own Bahraini chains, which have, you know, risen through, like the, which have, let's say, became more popular in the last few months. So thank you, Nasreen.
Thank you.
Indeed, we have, I think, another question from Khalid.
So I would like. Do you hear me first? I would like to thank you all, you guys, so for your fruitful and very elaborative comments indeed. I would like to ask Dr. Sam first. You adopted Michel Foucault's strategy of neutralization of the enemy. Don't you consider that Foucault, in this rhetoric, is by himself is using a violent language, considering the other as an enemy, and considering language in itself as a strategy of neutralization of the other? And as far as Dr. Alfred, I want to illuminate me in terms of the American identity and in terms of this niceness, and it's because as far as I know, that the American identity as well has to do with, as far as I know, for it's highly utilitarian and materialistic and capitalistic sense, besides to other religious and transcendental composition of the identity. And my last question for Asma, Dr. Asma, don't you think that one of the influence is the capitalist system in itself and how it works? So the capitalist system always works for profit, and one way or another, so it has to do with economy and so on. So these are my three questions for everybody. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much. Indeed, we can take, I think, a couple of questions and then leave the floor to the participants to answer them all. If you may, there is a question from Yasin Hamid. Would you please approach the mic, Yasin?
So my question will be for Dr. Samori Hari, like this. Is his name? Yes. I would like to ask him first about the choice, his choice of the photo of to Mr. Dr. or Mr. Michel Foucault, and the photo itself was very symbolic, I think, as Foucault was raising his hands as if he was excusing or apologizing from Dred Scott, that language itself didn't serve him to get his freedom. And by the way, this case is taught at Tunisian universities in civilization, so it's not strange for us. By the way, so here the intervention of Dr. Samori was about language and violence. So violence and means the power or the powerfulness about language. And language, of course, this powerfulness is always with the side which is more powerful than the other, but we don't focus on the other side. So if we would like to see the story from the other side, or the other side of the story, and focus on the loser, who is Dred Scott himself, how can we account about language or the role of the language? So Dred Scott and his family, when they were defending their case, so did language serve them to get them rights? So here, this is my question about so the role of the language and the two sides. So it is language is power, but what about the loser, okay, and the weaker part? So did language serve them to get their rights? This is my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Yassine. Another question, I think, from Dunya.
Yeah, so my question is for the presentation of language and violence. So
Dr. Samuli,
yeah,
again, yes.
sorry. So due to the latest political events in the world, for example, the war of Gaza, what role does political rhetoric play in either increasing or decreasing violence, and how can language be used responsibly in the political arena? That's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Since everybody is bombarding Samuli, please, I need to throw a rocket also. So Sam, language is power. What do you think? Do you think language is power or power is power? Any other questions before we leave the floor to the answers? I think Hani, Amal, and Rahimi, they have questions. So Amal first, then Rahimi before leaving the floor to colleagues to answer. Amal?
Amal, sir, Amal.
Amal, Hani Amal, right? Or Amal, sorry.
No problem. So, Mrs. Asma, thank you so much for your insightful lecture. So, as you stated earlier, the issue of consumerism is become very crucial, especially in this century. I mean, I think it started earlier from the Industrial Revolution. So, through the growth of products and the growth of the needs of people, and even when they do not need some product, they will buy it because of advertisement. So do you think that consumerism shape the social class? I mean, is consumerism become a feature of certain social classes? That's it. Yeah, thank you.
My question is for Dr. Samuli about language and violence. I think everything started with language. First, even God himself, when he decided to create the universe, he said be, and there it was. And as in acts of violence on a big, larger scale, like between two states, language is first used to mobilize the masses. There must be a rhetoric of violence, because in order to kill, to commit a crime, act of violence, you have first to do it in your mind before you do it in reality. You go to the battlefield and pick up guns and stuff. Don't you think that everything started with language? Language first before everything starts with language. Every act, every behavior, every conduct we do in is based on something that we perceive from language as a way of mobilization. That's my question.
Yeah, I'm also looking forward to Samuli. I won't ask a question to him. National identity, good question. At first you have to agree that there's something like a national identity. Nowadays, within the reign or the still ongoing reign of post-structuralism, some people would say there is no such thing as a national identity. I would say that there are good arguments to say that there's something which is as a disclaimer. When it comes to an American national identity, I think you are very right. Materialistic, capitalistic, utilitarian, that definitely sociologist in the 19th century. He said the US is a market society, and at the same time a Puritan nation. So also the influence of religiosity, of Puritanism, is very important for identifying something like an American national traits, American national identity. What Brahman is doing, I still think, is very enlightening and has a explanatory power to pointing towards niceness, because it's so, you know, in everyday daily interactions, it's superficial in a way and obvious, and that's why it tends to be forgotten or tends to be overlooked. But her reading of American history through niceness explains much, and explains in the first place why you can forget about structural inequality, about genocide, about racism, by painting it over with niceness, as I briefly hinted at, this kind of, he was a slave owner, but he was a nice man. We can't hear you.
Hi. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So in regards to the first question about capitalism system, now, yes, if you dive more into the American commercial culture, you will see that it is hugely rooted in capitalism. Now, has this affected the rest of the world? I'd say, unfortunately, although I'm not an expert in capitalism, but it's evident that we also have been affected by capitalism as well, unfortunately saying. As to the other question, you asked if feature of certain, if let's say commercialism or consumerism is a feature of certain social classes. Now, I took a moment to reflect on this question, and I think it depends on the region. So for example, in the West world, you would say that, let's say that the upper class do not usually, I'm not going to say do not usually, but you will find, some, let's say, characters who don't show wealth. However, in the Middle Eastern region, our region, and in specific the GCC, it's kind of, consumerism does not relate to a social class. You will see everyone wanting to buy stuff, everyone wanting to get stuff, everyone wanting to own stuff. Not because we have oil under our houses, we don't have that. Not because we shower in oil, we also don't have that. That's a misconception. But you will always see that people tend to show a class that they don't accurately belong to. So I hope that answers your question. To sum up, I'm saying that it depends on the region. In our region, it's not necessarily related to, let's say, a social class. It's basically something that everyone wants to do for a specific reason. And the rest of the world, based on what I've seen and based on my travel, I don't usually see people, trying to show it or trying to, reflect their social class in what they own. So I hope that answered your question, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Asma, the floor is yours, Dr. Samuli Houri, to maybe briefly provide an answer to the set of questions. The 10 questions I think we asked, this must remind you of something. Yes.
I think it's 37 questions to Samuli.
I'm very pleased, obviously, of all the questions, and also I'm I'm a little bit surprised, happily, that the audience there, is so well versed in Foucault and such things. But let me see, it was not 35 questions, but I think 5 questions that I gathered, and I tried to briefly say something about each of them, which were equally profound and maybe worthwhile for a whole seminar itself with these questions. But first, Foucault's violence, whether or not Foucault himself, when he was proposing this analytic or other things that he was doing, whether his own language is actually some sort of exercise of violence or violent in nature. And that is exactly, I think, the truth of how he would himself at least define his own way of acting in speech. He was not one of those guys who would try to kind of let's come together and speak together about this and find a common understanding, and then we are all happy. That was not at all his idea. One way in which he would propose this violent aspect of all his research would be when he was like telling, I think it was a conference of lawyers in Belgium at some point, when he was trying to explain why he goes back to history, and then he would say that, well, it is the idea of looking into the past, he would say, is so to realize that those things that we take for granted are historically and contingently generated, and at that point, when you really realize that they are historically contingently created and generated, then you can destroy them politically, these things that one takes for granted. For certainly he had a certain affection to destruction and violence in the way in which he conducted research and talked about things and so on. So that is, the violence is certainly one aspect of his work, I would say. Thanks for that question. But then with that comes also the next question, which was, how about the language? And speaking of rights, for instance, how about that from the perspective of the subjects, from the perspective of the subjugated? And that actually hits to the very heart of many efforts of Foucault himself, but also by those that came after him, to try to kind of really to analyze and make use of that side of Foucault, where in which he would give the hints and also guidelines for all those people who want to practice resistance. So there are many ways in which he would himself provide those tools for resist against the hegemonic, let's say, juridical or Jupiterian exercise of power over them, and try to kind of open the ways in which you can work not only in these historical and whatever studies, but also within the language of the power itself, the legal language, how you can turn that language against exactly those who wield power themselves, and thus provide tools for the subjugated and the subjects. And that is really one aspect of Foucault, and certainly one aspect of my own work with Foucault. And certainly you can also detect that in the US constitutional history, and I think Robert so wonderfully already did that when he was like presenting the way in which the women and the black would make use of the language of the Declaration, which first appeared to be the language of the of those who are in power, and make use of that same language to practice resistance. And then about the political rhetoric, that was also really interesting question about how that what is the responsibility of nowadays of how would you, what would be the responsible way to address and talk about things when you have so much in the air which is ruthlessly putting things in ways that are like, you know, twisting or doing violence to the reality, if you like, that part of reality which is not linguistically constructed or discursive. But what comes to my mind is what I read from, I think it was in some American newspaper, but coming from Israel exactly, when one of the leaders, I think it was Netanyahu, who was saying like this, putting it like this: Hamas is ISIS. And you know, that kind of like rhetoric where in which you make these kinds of equations is obviously something that is extremely power as a picture. But then, you know, one should be, I think, very Foucauldian in this sense, that you can kind of perceive in that one, that kind of like rhetorical practices which really, like somebody, like the next question was, or the last question was putting it, which mobilize hatreds and can mobilize people to do violence. So I think that this is really what is needed in here, to have that kind of view, and I think that much of the responsibility for that is exactly for you, on the part for you, to the linguists and language scholars, to kind of like take up this kind of responsibility, where you would examine the kind of like, you know, the mechanism in language which are not about communication and finding out the common understanding, and doing it ethically, but exactly that kind of like vicious practice of power which is there. And I can say that the analytic that the pieces that I was reading from Foucault were exactly coming from that kind of context, where in which he was at the end of his life engaging in a discussion with Jürgen Habermas, another theorist of language, who would start from the idea that there is some kind of ethical dimension enacted every time we engage in a discussion with somebody else. When we start speaking to another, that means that some kind of ethics is enacted, and we can build on that. And that is all, like, you know, the idea there in the background there is that speaking itself is ethical as such. Whereas Foucault would engage with that exactly and say that this kind of thing is not true, that speaking to another can be, and most often is, strategic practice. It's not a seminar when Netanyahu speaks on TV, or a seminar like this one, for instance, where we genuinely try to understand each other. But anyways, that was interesting there. And then Mimoun was saying, how language is power, but how power is power. I know where that comes from. Maybe everyone who knows Mimoun must know that it obviously comes from the Game of Thrones, one of the nicest scenes in there. But I would say that this kind of has a serious thing there as well. I mean, obviously it's serious, but if you have language and power as separate things, you would have like three types of like three ways of like, you know, putting the relationship between the two. One of them would be to separate them entirely. You have the powers, relations, and structures down here, and then you would have language here, which is entirely different thing, and you would have it there in the way that it is like this is the determining fact of power, which determines everything, and the language is only about like covering it up, or making people believe into something else, or whatever. But this is the defining thing. Then there is another one in which you would have it in the way that language actually operates within this power structure. It makes it possible. It makes certain forms certain forms of language, linguistic forms, enable the power structure to take form. And this is the Euro-Marxist analysis, obviously, of how the ideological forms are actually necessary for the economic base to work out. But then you would have the third one, and if in here you would have language here, power here, and here you would have the language somehow operating in the power, then in the Foucauldian way to see that is that he would like to isolate. I mean, he was also about like doing research on non-discursive practices of power, but when he was talking about discourse and language, he was willing to see it as separate, to analyze it apart, also to analyze the field of discourse apart from anything else, and try to see how there is also a certain order, certain subjugative order and way of relating within the language itself, seeing the language as such a certain, like, you know, structure, which structuring structure, which is exercise of power as such. So that might be one answer to Mimoun. And then the last bit, it was a bit I'm not sure if I got it right. There was some technical whatever, but what I understood is that you said that with speech one mobilizes people to act, but also to act violently or to go to war and to demonstrations. And you need like, that kind of like, speech type of thing over there. And this is obviously there as well. You have the ancient division, I'm sure that you know the Aristotelian division of the effectiveness of language, where one is the ethos, the second is pathos, and only the third one is logos, which means that the pathos thing is exactly that by speech you are creating the emotions in the audience, and that's one way of making it effective. And I would like to add perhaps the ancient proverb and end it here, the very nice legal proverb exactly, which is which goes like this: verbis ad verbera. Somebody who knows Latin perhaps can translate it better than me, but it's something like this, that from words to whip. And whip is the kind of violent action, and in law that means that words lead to action. And in the ancient Roman law, it would mean, as an advice to the rhetors, exactly that you have to be careful with what you say, because what you say can lead to actions, and that's why these things are like, all the time, like, in link to each other. So verbis ad verbera. That's where I would like to
Thank you.
close, and thank you for
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Samoli. At the end of this session, I would like to thank the participants in this Global Fulbrighters lecture series, transdisciplinary lecture series, exploring diverse perspectives in language, culture, and society. I would like to thank particularly all the participants, Eva from Poland, Wedcha from Mauritius, Pierre from Chile and Haiti, Anna Gabriela from Costa Rica, Namayuba from Zambia, Shahrayar from Bangladesh. I would like to thank also today's presenters, Samueli from Turku, University of Turku, Finland, Robert Alfred Winkler from Austria, University of Salzburg. I would like to thank Preet also, Preet Hairadar from University of Lingnam, Hong Kong. And I would like to thank also Asma Hassan Elmir from University of Bahrain. We loved your presentations, and we liked them so much. So please accept our sincere thanks for your time, for your effort, and for your belief in the relevance of launching a global lecture series. I would like also to thank the audience, the online participants, and the in-person attendees here. Special thanks to my student and friend Khalil, who helped me with practically everything. This lecture series is based on participants who attended SUSI program 2023 in New York University. I would like to say that I hope all participants launch similar maybe lecture series from time to time, maybe twice a year, each time in a different university. I would like to invite you also, all participants, to Faculty of Arts and Humanities Cairo 1 conference that will take place in November 2024. I sent you the call for papers. It is entitled Intersectionality. You are also welcome to join another event to be organized April 17th on artificial intelligence in language teaching, learning, assessment, and research. I'm sure many of you can find a niche where to present and to work on it. Again, I express my sincere, extreme happiness to see you again, dear colleagues. We spent wonderful time in New York University, New York City, and I'm so glad that I managed to share with my students here aspects of the fruitful, constructive, and thought-provoking topics I discussed with you in Washington Square during the Washington Square conferences, and the debates also we had at Kimball Hall. So thank you very much. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Asma. Preet also. And thank you all for your time and effort. I hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for organizing. You're the chief.
So,
Thank you.
so, bye.